I'm Alexandra Kreis, and you're listening to Outer Travel in a Journey. Journeying now for 30 years into the life and practice of yoga, I have met many who have taken interesting turns, went past extraordinary bumps, and reached unexpected places. People with whom I shared conversations about everyday struggles, intimate realizations, larger questions, ideas, and dreams. So today, I'm passing on the mic to one of them so we could hear and celebrate the wisdom in people's differences and experiences.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Outer Travel in a Journey. And hello to Patrick Harraghy, my guest on this show today. Hi.
Hello, Alexander. Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you and seeing you again after so many years, Patrick. I'm so glad you made it to the show, and yeah, good to see
Yes.
you.
Okay. And I enjoyed meeting you while you were living in Dublin. And yes, so it's
Yeah,
nice to see that you are.
we, we had a nice and good run of exchange. So you doing exercise, and then for the listener we do a quick we did yoga together, and for the listener I just want to give a brief introduction that you can then extend into your personal story if you like. So Patrick Harraghy, he is currently in Ireland and living in Ireland, and we met because he was looking for some yoga. I taught him, and when I taught him, I found out he is a psychotherapist and who specializes in working with trauma. And as we lately reconnected, we also figured out we have something in common in trying to help people to stabilize their life, whether they are traumatized or not. And you mentioned these 5 key resources that you use for yourself, I believe, as much as for anybody you help with. So exercise, food, engagement, and relaxation are the key words of our conversation today.
That's right. And sleep also. Yes.
And sleep. Sleep is relaxation as well, isn't it, Patrick?
Sorry. Yeah, sleep is relaxation, but it's but it's an important part as well that people get
Yeah.
adequate sleep. It helps them to stabilize.
Yeah. Because sleep is more as relaxation. You're right. It's kind of a self healer, isn't it? I mean, in sleep, so much more happens than happens when we just actively relax.
Yeah, a lot of healing happens when people are asleep, and that's an important. And I suppose when I work with trauma, it's a lot of people have difficulty in sleeping.
Mm.
They have nightmares, they have all sorts of things that keep them awake. So,
Yeah.
so using techniques to get a proper night's sleep is quite important. You know.
Mm. Yeah. What kind of techniques are we talking about?
Something we just call it sleep hygiene. Maybe not drinking caffeine like coffee, minerals late in the evening, not eating late, not taking alcohol, um, trying to go to bed maybe at the same time and getting up.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're even just getting up at the same time in the morning, you
Mm.
get that internal clock working.
Mm.
So preparing for sleep as well. Maybe it's like a baby. If a baby, you're getting the baby ready to bed, you might spend an
Mm.
hour doing little things. So I think adults may be the same.
Yeah.
Maybe going for a bath, maybe
Mm.
doing something, not watching anything serious, turn off TV, turn off computers, maybe an
Mm.
hour beforehand, things like that.
Mm. I like that you're calling it sleep hygiene. I call it these are the basis of my Ayurvedic program that I keep talking about, but it's not my program, but it was instigated in a very important text in Ayurveda, the Samhitas. And in that text, there's just one page that says, how you run your day. And one of these things that happens when you read through it, it really creates a sense of you have to have an evening routine, like you have to create the atmosphere around the bedroom time, or the time before sleep, rather than getting fixed on can I sleep or not sleep? What do I do when I lie awake in bed? Kind of
Yeah,
scenarios.
yeah. And there's other things then like progressive relaxation. You probably know more a bit about that.
Mm. Yes, of
There's
course.
different exercises that people can do, if they
Mm-hmm.
can't sleep while they're in bed. And that's
Yeah.
normally as a result of trauma, maybe, if they find that themselves, if they're activated,
Yeah.
nice or techniques like that. Very often panic attacks, if people have panic attacks in the middle of the night,
Mm.
grounding exercises, getting out, maybe
Mm.
putting the feet on the floor,
Mm-hmm.
whole lot of different techniques that we use
Yeah.
as well.
What kind of trauma do you encounter? I mean, a lot of us, I had two people on this show already talking about trauma, but I would love to hear what is your main experience? What kind of trauma are you facing in your work?
Okay, I would divide trauma into two different categories. There's the developmental trauma that I think everybody experiences in some ways growing up in families. It can be due to social issues, alcohol issues, separations, divorce, uh, domestic violence, all that sort of stuff. And then the other type then is shock trauma. It can be sexual abuse, traffic
Mm.
accidents, work accidents. I've been working with somebody just today now and with a serious accident on a building site
Yeah.
and all that sort of stuff. And so there's a different ways of working with both. I probably won't go into it too deeply here, but
Of course.
uh, with developmental trauma, people develop, say, putting in a nutshell, belief systems, that,
Mm. Yeah.
and with trauma, a lot of parts are put into the unconscious. With trauma, if there's, say, something going on in the family, maybe people use avoidance techniques. That's just one thing. And that's when people are then adults, then they're using the same techniques, in relationships, they're avoiding conflict, they're avoiding, and
Are these,
that's,
sorry, are these people aware of that they're going through trauma? Because I often think and sense that we do not really tap into developmental trauma a lot for ourselves until maybe a relationship breaks, as you say, or maybe we can't hold a job because of insomnia or whatever. What is your experience? How do people come
that
to you?
that can be the situation as well.
Mm.
Very often, like somebody, I've had a few people say, for instance, they've had pains, maybe, different pains in the body. They've gone down the medical road and they find absolutely nothing. So it turns out it's a somatic thing,
Ah.
So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
very often, when people become parents, maybe their
Mm.
child reaches 3 or 4, that's the time
Mm.
maybe they had the trauma, when they were small. So that actually activates their own trauma, you know. There's a whole lot of different things. I've worked
Yeah.
with people, say, for instance, who know one particular person who had a very successful career,
Mm.
and after about 20 years, he couldn't travel, couldn't get into a plane anymore, couldn't get into a lift, couldn't. So it was all the trauma sort of re-emerged,
Yeah. It
So
can kind of hit out of the blue, isn't it? Like that, it can be triggered by something, and then
it
we
can
can
be
end up.
triggered because, yes, our bodies have a way of sort of hiding the trauma, or sort of that's a protecting. We have
Mm.
protectors that protect us from the trauma,
Mm.
and then all of a sudden can erupt. You know.
I see
Uh,
that often in my practice as a consultant. That people come with pains or things, and they often when we go through the health history, and because as such, like you, we're working also with the mental aspects of feeling. It's not like how your skin looks, how your poses, how your eyes shine, your skin shine, but we're looking also at the relationship between things that happen. And what I hear most often is that people feel like, but I could do this, I could do this before. I didn't have these issues before. And I often kind of relate this to really coming to a point, a high point in their life. And we might not call it trauma, but to a juncture where the body says like, I don't want to do this anymore. You have to face it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And I'm sure another thing, since you're into yoga, I'm sure you've heard of iRest
yes.
yoga. Yeah. And Richard Miller. Have you heard of Richard Miller? I think he was the person who developed. So that is as you probably know, a lot of people who have trauma, when they do yoga relaxation exercises, it can actually bring them back into the trauma again.
Yeah.
So we have to be very, very careful. And as I know, as a yoga teacher, I have a few friends now who are yoga teachers, or I have clients actually who went to yoga and got traumatized because the yoga teacher wasn't trauma informed, so it's very important that
yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because I also have other teachers in my circle of teachers that were saying how important it is not to push everybody into meditation, and because it can reactivate trauma. That was one thing that came out quite early 10 years ago. And everybody is so, oh yeah, it's so nice to relax in yoga and it's shavasana, I like it, but very little do we know about where people come from.
Yeah, because very often the abuse happens. Say for instance, when somebody has been in their bed, and that's when the abuse maybe happened. So when they go into relaxation, that's when they get triggered. But generally, I find that if it's a guided meditation, that maybe works with some people, and maybe
but not not the classic ones where we're talking about Zen meditation, silence meditation, where you just sit and watch. So that's what I'm talking about.
And the other thing I was going to say with trauma, my experience as well, especially with police, army, fire brigade personnel, they're normally used to an active life. And so when trauma hits them, then they go sick maybe from work, and they're at home, and their whole system gets out of sync. They're they stop doing exercise, their diet changes, they're drinking more coffee. And so a lot of the work I find as well is just stabilizing, getting them back again. Exercise in particular is, I think, is very, very important. And I do, as you know, I do a lot of exercise, and I do a lot of mountaineering, hiking. And,
what do you find so engaging about mountaineering? I remember you excessively talking about trips and how you kind of keep your, like it's, I think, the key point to your life almost, and to your happiness, if I look at you as a person from my perspective.
Yeah,
how did you
for
get
myself,
there?
I think, because I grew up on a small farm on the west of Ireland. And as a child, we always worked. At 6 years of age, 10 years of age, there was always work to do on the farm. And I have a love of nature. I love the plants, the birds, the streams, lakes, mountains. It's a huge resource for me. But I also find that when I'm working with clients who are traumatized, we try and develop a safe place, because going back to trauma again, there's a Dan Siegel. He developed what he calls a window of tolerance. And so it's when you're working with trauma, you have to keep people within that window. If they go outside that window, then they're activated. So we try and get people to visualize a safe place. And most times it's beside water or in nature,
Oh.
So
do they choose that themselves, or are you suggesting?
I would ask them to just kind of remember a safe place, a place where they feel, very happy, And very often it's beside a river, it's on a mountain, it's listening to birds, it's all that sort of stuff, So,
would you say you've been through trauma yourself? Because I hear you, saying my key question is like, why did you pick up hiking next to that you love nature? Was there a key moment for you to say like, yeah, I need to do this more often, or?
Yes, I did experience trauma myself, and I also worked. I think what got me into this work initially was I worked in the police,
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of my colleagues would have had trauma. I've had a few instances myself as well. I have known people to develop addictions and things like that as a result of trauma. And I think that's very sad, because when trauma
Yeah.
is treated, there's ways of coping with it. And I think that's very, very important, that people who are working in the health area, that it's very, very important that we take self-care. And the other part of that, my self-care now at the moment would be going hiking in the mountains, in nature. And it helps me then to be more available for my clients. Normally on a Sunday, I would do maybe a 37K, 40K hike, maybe spend 8 hours in nature, and you come back, then you're ready for Monday morning again. You're
Yeah.
completely
Yeah.
completely refreshed.
Yeah.
But we mentioned sleep as well. So I think when people exercise, their sleep improves an awful lot.
Yeah.
Because I've worked with people, say, for instance, people who do a lot of exercise and they get an injury, like a knee injury or a foot injury, and they can't exercise. And then they find then after they're not sleeping as well. So, so exercise helps the sleep as well. I think is very, very, very important.
Yeah. And I think also the right balance in exercise. I mean, there's some people who go to the extremes of doing too much in order to remedy their sleeplessness or whatever they're facing. So there can be a fine balance between exercising and exercising.
I'm glad now you mentioned that, because I've been working with somebody recently, and exercise was the addiction.
Yeah.
Somebody was doing extreme exercise, and as a result, then the relationship faltered, because not spending enough time with relationship. So so that's a very important aspect as well. Work as well. A lot of people who've been traumatized will work 12 hours, 16 hours a day, and that keeps them away from their traumas.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's it's not just alcohol, drugs addiction.
Yeah.
It can be
Or abuse.
work,
Yeah.
shopping.
Or yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to reveal here a little bit, that and in the finest form, that this pandemic is sort of traumatic for people, because they might not, or that they find back into trauma that has been there from a developmental side, because maybe they need to overwork. Some part of the workforce here in Germany, and people I relate to, they are called to being like super busy, and then other people are the opposite to that. So what's your perspective and experience right now
Yeah.
with this?
At the moment now, I think anybody who suffers a bit of anxiety or trauma, they're not doing the same resources. Like in Ireland at the moment, we've got a 5K limit. People can't go beyond their 5K limit. So I'm lucky where I live. I live beside the mountains, so I can do but there's other people who are living in different parts, say, of Dublin, and they don't have access to that at the moment. And all the gyms are closed. Even yoga studios, it's all online at the moment.
Yeah.
So maybe in a couple of minutes
So
we'll talk
yeah,
about social
yeah, that's
engagement as
yeah.
well. That's
Talk
another.
about it. How do
Yeah.
we deal with the non-social engagement that's only happening on screen these days? What's your advice?
Yeah, I think that's the best. I suppose it's important that people do use the screen to their full advantage, and even with social engagement, you and I just here now, like our facial expressions, you
Yeah.
know, our eye, we are making some sort of a contact, you know. Um, there's a Stephen Porges, if you want to look up Stephen Porges, the polyvagal system.
Yeah.
He talks a lot about that, how important it is, our facial expressions, and so that is very, very
So
important. Yeah, but
yeah. So
also another good book for anybody to read is Kelly McGonigal. I think she taught yoga as well. No, she works in America, and she's a psychologist, and she has written several books. But one is what's it called? I can't think of the name, but I have the book anyway. It's about exercise in general, but also doing exercise in groups. That like say in a yoga studio where you have a group of people doing it together, in a gym as well where you have people doing exercise together, because not only are you doing the exercise but your social engagement part as well is being activated. You know?
But
So
that's what I'm saying. It's deactivated. I know that you're saying it. We have to make do with the screen and seeing the expressions of people. But from the back of the hand, what would you tell people what to do? How to kind of fulfill their needs for exercise, social engagement beyond, maybe staring at the screen and doing a yoga class with a group of people that you can't really see in all the little pictures. Is there something that you could safely, pass on to people who are listening right now and maybe looking for answers?
yeah, with the COVID as well, I suppose. Yes, it's maybe using the screen. There's an awful lot of even free stuff on the screens at the moment, exercises that people can do. I suppose as the weather gets better, even going out walking in the garden. The book, the Kelly McGonigal, just the name of the book came into my head there, The Joy of Movement. That's the name of the book. And she talks about doing exercise that you enjoy doing rather than, if you don't like jogging, don't do jogging, but do something, do swimming or do something else. Like, so it's the joy, getting joy out of it. Like,
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly my point when I tell people to engage in a breath body practice to really inspire also the hormones and the whole lymphatic system, and the immune system gets more strong if you keep your body moving. But it doesn't need to be a yoga exercise. It can be also dance parties in your own living room or something like that.
yeah, all that's yeah. And then again, eating healthily, I think that's important as well. Eating healthily, and
Yeah.
and
But it's
and
very hard, like, I mean, we've been talking about this, my husband and I, and we live quite healthily. We have access to organic food. We can afford organic food as well. And but it's also almost like people get so bored these days that they feel like they have to do this binge watching and higher, consummation of sugar and alcohol. I think that is quite common in winter, as well as it kind of is now becoming more and more a problem in Germany. The best sold product is alcohol.
alcohol.
More than
Yes, yeah. That is a danger at the moment as well. And I'm also hearing in Ireland as well that the domestic abuse has gone up,
yeah.
because there are some, in small apartments, maybe you have maybe 3 or 4 people working together, they're all
Yes.
working at home, and that's
Yeah.
causing major problems. So
Mm.
what I would do is advise people, say, just to get out for a walk around the block, say at just at their lunch break, even
Mm.
for, even if to get out for a 10-minute walk. So it's
Mm.
important to get out of the environment, and
Mm.
to respect, have boundaries as well, to respect other people in the same
Mm.
household who's working,
Mm.
and everybody has different jobs. And I think
Mm.
in some families, maybe some people think my job is more important than your job, and
Mm.
it's important to respect what other
Yeah.
people are doing as well, to give them the space.
Yeah. And we have a little bit of a problem here also with space. And now for the second lockdown, I had this idea of buying the overhead headphones that you see here, and we signal that to each other. If I wear this, you can't disrupt me. This is my work space. This is my office space, and it works quite well. And we kind of came up with a lot of funny and fun things to respect each other in the household. And maybe it can be more search in families or in shared apartments, how you want to co-create these
Yeah.
respectful manners. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. Also, what I'm discovering as well, I know there are some people say starting work at maybe 6 o'clock in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
They spend time then maybe getting the children ready for different things, but they're still working at 10 o'clock that night. There's no,
Mm.
that's important that people put a
Yeah.
structure to their
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
And a lot of people I find as well is, they're used to working in the office environment and they can shout across if they need help with
Mm.
something. And some managers aren't responding to emails or phone calls, and the person is struggling at home trying to finish a project, and they
Mm.
need help, and that help is not readily available. So
Yeah.
that's a huge
Yeah.
thing that needs
Mm.
to be looked at. There's,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm talking to a few people that have managing positions, and they're noticing. I mean, everybody was happy when they were able to keep working, and they found these solutions with all the different team meeting tools, the video conferences. But we're seeing the back end of that as well right now, as you're describing. More and more managers feel like they're seeing, particularly people who are single and are not tied into a social system, like into an immediate family or whatever, and are also taking the lockdown rules quite serious, which is okay, but they're finding themselves really struggling. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this.
yeah. And especially like I would have a few people, clients that I know that they're living alone,
Mm.
and yeah, they're finding that very, very difficult.
Mm.
uh, you know, and because they have anxiety issues, maybe trauma backgrounds as well,
Mm.
they're they have social issues as well. They find it difficult maybe socializing with people, and those people now can be very isolated. You know,
Yeah.
um, I do find that I know some employers they're putting on special events for their staff.
Mm-hmm.
Which is fantastic.
Mm.
But if all employers did that, it'd be great. That
Yeah. Special
yeah.
events like what are they offering? That sounds good.
Uh, like maybe even a cooking thing. Maybe putting on a cooking class and getting
Yeah.
people. I know one company. I think even to send the ingredients. I think out to the
Wow.
participants, and
Wow.
you'd sort of cook together.
Yeah.
Quizzes as well. Quizzes
Mm.
and. But also having regular meetings, making sure that everybody is okay, that
Mm.
sort of thing.
Mm.
It's because I think again, I think that's a very important thing in trauma as well, especially in somebody's in an organization when their boss checks in on them,
Yeah.
and it means that they're cared for. When somebody feels that when they feel my boss cares about me, that's a huge
Mm.
healing thing. That.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, my boss has taken the trouble to check in
Yeah.
that I'm okay. That's important.
Yeah.
I think that's
Mm.
what needs to happen now with the COVID as well.
Mm.
Employers may need to put systems in place that to check that all
Mm.
their employees are coping okay. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, and if you don't have such an employer, we can only highly recommend either to seek private support, like seek out somebody like Patrick, or find a group forum where you can be seen and understood. That's
Y- Yeah, it's very, very important that we keep contacts going anyway. It's important that
mm,
we
mm,
socialize. That's very, very important. And hopefully this with the vaccinations, I think there's a bit of hope there now at the moment that
mm,
maybe
mm.
in another few months things might be a bit better, you know.
Yeah, we have a saying in my coaching program where we kind of lift up people to the standards that they want to live at, even in difficult times, where we say like, don't tweak out, but reach out, because we all struggle. We all find life difficult at times, and not even in pandemic, but life is there to be shared, and we are all just human beings.
We all
So
human, yeah. And that can be a consequence of trauma as well. A lot of people become self-reliant as a result of trauma, and they have a difficulty in reaching out, so reaching out is an
And
important
how
thing.
do you have a trick? How can somebody reach out?
Okay, from the model that I trained in, it's called sensory motor psychotherapy. Pat Ogden, I think she originated, or her ancestors came from Germany, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
So even in therapy, we'd even do like reaching out physically as well, being able to reach out. And by doing that, then it maybe can help people to reach out, because yeah, it can be
But
yeah.
how do you reach out when you don't have anybody? I mean, that is the difficulty. I hear what you're saying, and then at the same time, I imagine somebody sitting at home struggling, not noticing that the symptoms are showing traumatic symptoms, but just feeling responsible for not finding sleep, trying to keep their job, to keep their livelihood. So, how do they apply sensory motory? How do they apply that trick of sensory motory motivation?
Okay, I suppose they would have to come to a therapist initially, as opposed to develop some of those skills, because it's a lifelong. Like, say for instance, I knew a girl one time. She was working in an environment where she had to lift something heavy, maybe a couple of times a week, and she struggled with herself. But like, there was a few big lads working, a few big men working with her, and they found that she was stuck up. They saw her, and so eventually I got her to ask for help. And when she asked them for help, they were delighted to help. But also she started to socialize with them, and her life changed. Her life changed completely. Like, it's just a simple exercise of asking people for help.
Yeah. Like, even when you go into a shop and say like, can you help me where to find this? That can be like the first exercise you can do like, if we all go shopping still. So
Yeah. And that's another exercise I do with clients as well, that when they go into the shop, to have a conversation with the person at the cashier, just to say it's a nice day or something, just, because that's part of our socializing as well, just do little techniques like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like we do have similar working patterns. I work with groups, you work with single individuals. So I find this quite exciting. As long as we're trying to keep the idea of, we all have our stories to tell in the foreground, and most people are more interested in listening to stories and listening to what happened in someone's life than you would figure out initially if you hold back. So yeah, I find that interesting.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
A final word from you, Patrick. Do you want to live or give a piece of advice or to the listener, or just say something concluding?
Again, I suppose, get out, move. Movement is very, very important, and seek help. Always seek help if you're, because this life is not this is not a rehearsal. It's important that we just live life to our full potential. And anybody with trauma, in my experience, people who work through their traumas, to become more spiritual, they get more in touch with themselves, and there's a good life. out there to be lived, So that's
Yeah, beautiful. Thank
mm.
you. Yeah, and just to clarify, spiritual. How do you explain spiritual? I have different kind of ways of talking about spirituality.
Okay, spirituality. It's different. It's different for everybody. Being in nature for some people, like going to yoga. That's going to yoga, going to psychotherapy. That sometimes we call it. Yeah, we can grow spiritually that way. Some people use religion. Religion can be very useful, but sometimes I think religion can also stop growth because people just go into a routine of religion, and
it's too dogmatic sometimes.
it can be and it's also very useful for it's a good way for some people, but for other ways for other people it can stop the spiritual growth.
Just I'm asking you this because, of course, traditionally, like spirituality is something very difficult to describe in Ireland. There's a whole sense of, the church and what the church has done with that. That's why I wanted you to explain how we can seek out spirituality in a different way.
Because as well as that, I find that when you mention spirituality to some people, they think it's religion, it's that. So it's more than that.
Or it's esoteric, so not so steeped in wisdom of the old and wise and that's what I wanted to clarify.
It's continual. I think we just talk about the road to enlightenment. It's a continuous road, until the day we die. We're learning, and I think that's the important. We never arrive there. It's just it's a journey that we're on.
I love it. So happy journeying, everybody. Thanks again to my guest, Patrick. It was lovely to have this conversation with you.
If you enjoy listening to my podcast, please consider to become a patron at patreon.com/Alexandra Kreis and pledge your donation.